In the spring of 1957, something extraordinary allegedly happened in Washington, D.C. that would become one of the most fascinating stories in UFO lore. A man calling himself Valiant Thor arrived at the Pentagon claiming to be from Venus, and according to those who tell this tale, he spent 3 years working with the highest levels of the United States government. Whether you believe it or not, the story of Valiant Thor has captivated researchers, believers and skeptics alike for decades, weaving together elements of Cold War paranoia, spiritual awakening, and humanity's eternal question about whether we're alone in the universe. The story begins on March 16, 1957, when a craft reportedly landed in a field in Alexandria, Virginia, not far from the Pentagon. According to the account popularized by Dr. Frank Strangers, an evangelist and UFO researcher who would later become Thor's primary chronicler, 2 police officers witnessed the landing and approached the craft. What they found was a man who appeared completely human, standing about 6 feet tall, with brown wavy hair, brown eyes, and what witnesses described as an almost luminous quality to his skin. He was dressed in a simple but elegant manner, and he spoke perfect English. This man introduced himself as Valiant Thor, sometimes called Val Thor or Commander Valiant Thor, and he told the officers he needed to speak with President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, you might think that claiming to be an alien and demanding an audience with the president would get you arrested or committed to a psychiatric facility. But according to the story, something about Thor was different. He carried no identification in the conventional sense, but he did have some kind of credentials or documentation that the officers couldn't quite understand. More importantly, he possessed a presence, a charisma, and a knowledge that seemed to transcend normal human capability. The officers, rather than dismissing him as a lunatic, actually facilitated his request, and through a series of contacts and communications, Valiant Thor was allegedly brought to the Pentagon. At the Pentagon, Thor reportedly met with Secretary of Defense Neil McElroy and eventually with President Eisenhower himself. According to Frank Strangers, who claimed to have met Thor personally and maintained contact with him, the alien visitor came with a specific mission. Thor told government officials that he was from Venus, though not from the surface as we know it, but from a civilization that existed in a different dimensional frequency, or perhaps beneath the planet's surface. He claimed to be part of the Council of the 12, representing a coalition of civilizations that had been observing Earth for thousands of years. His mission was simple yet profound: to help humanity avoid nuclear catastrophe and to guide us toward a more enlightened path of spiritual and technological development. Thor allegedly offered the United States government, and by extension all of humanity, the secrets to unlimited clean energy, the cure for all diseases, and technologies that would eliminate poverty and want. He spoke of free energy devices, advanced propulsion systems, and medical knowledge that could extend human life and eliminate suffering. But there was a catch, or perhaps more accurately, a condition. Thor insisted that these technologies could only be shared if humanity agreed to dismantle its nuclear weapons and abandon the path of mutual assured destruction that defined the Cold War era. He warned that nuclear weapons were not just a threat to humanity, but to the cosmic neighborhood, that nuclear explosions created ripples in space-time that affected other civilizations, and that Earth was being watched with growing concern by advanced beings throughout the galaxy. President Eisenhower, according to the story, was intrigued and perhaps even convinced by Thor's sincerity and the evidence he provided. Some versions of the tale suggest that Thor demonstrated his abilities or his technology in ways that left no doubt about his extraterrestrial origins. However, when Thor's proposal was presented to a larger group of advisors, military leaders, and what some call the military-industrial complex, it was rejected. The reasoning, as the story goes, was multifaceted. Some argued that accepting Thor's help would make humanity dependent on alien technology, that we would become a client species rather than developing our own capabilities. Others worried about the economic implications, particularly those with interests in oil, pharmaceuticals, and weapons manufacturing, industries that would be rendered obsolete by Thor's promised technologies. And of course, there was the Cold War itself. The idea of unilateral disarmament, even in exchange for miraculous technology, was unthinkable to many in the defense establishment who saw the Soviet Union as an existential threat. Unable to fulfill his primary mission, Thor reportedly remained on Earth anyway, taking up residence in a specially prepared apartment in the Pentagon itself. For 3 years, from 1957 to 1960, he allegedly lived and worked there, serving as an advisor and consultant to various government agencies. He was said to have perfect health, never eating much, never sleeping in the conventional sense, and possessing abilities that seemed almost supernatural. He could allegedly read minds, see the future, and had an encyclopedic knowledge of Earth's history, including events and details that were not in any public record. Those who met him described feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and love in his presence, as if he radiated a higher consciousness. Dr. Frank Stranges claimed to have been introduced to Thor in 1959 through a Pentagon contact. Stranges was a Pentecostal minister who had an interest in UFOs and had been investigating various sightings and encounters. According to Stranges, his meeting with Thor was life-changing. He described Thor as the most remarkable person he had ever met, someone who embodied perfect love, wisdom, and compassion. Thor allegedly told Stranges about life on Venus, describing a utopian civilization where there was no disease, no poverty, no war, and no death as we understand it. Venusians, according to Thor, lived for hundreds or even thousands of years, had mastered the relationship between mind, body, and spirit, and existed in harmony with universal laws that humanity had forgotten or never learned. Thor described Venus not as the hellish volcanic planet that our space probes would later reveal, but as a world existing in a different vibrational frequency, invisible to our instruments and our physical senses. This concept, while scientifically problematic, aligns with certain metaphysical and spiritual traditions that speak of multiple dimensions or planes of existence occupying the same space. Thor suggested that what we see when we look at Venus is merely the physical shell, while the real civilization exists in a higher dimension, accessible only to those with the proper consciousness or technology. During his time on Earth, Thor allegedly travelled beyond the Pentagon, though always under some level of supervision or protection. He reportedly met with various religious leaders, scientists, and other influential figures, always sharing the same message. Humanity stands at a crossroads, and the choices we make in the coming years will determine whether we ascend to join the galactic community or destroy ourselves in nuclear fire. He spoke of a coming age of enlightenment, a time when humanity would awaken to its true spiritual nature and take its place among the civilized worlds of the cosmos. But he also warned of the challenges ahead, the resistance from those who profit from humanity's ignorance and division, and the very real possibility that we might not make it. In March of 1960, Thor's mission on Earth officially ended. According to the story, he returned to his ship, which had been kept at a secret location, possibly at Edwards Air Force Base in California or another secure military installation. Before leaving, he allegedly promised to return, to continue monitoring humanity's progress, and to be ready to help if we ever chose to accept the assistance that was offered. Dr. Stranges claimed to have maintained contact with Thor through various means, including additional meetings and some form of telepathic or interdimensional communication. In 1967, Stranges published a book called Stranger at the Pentagon, which detailed his encounters with Thor and brought the story to a wider audience. The book became a cult classic in UFO circles, inspiring countless discussions, investigations, and debates. Stranges included photographs in the book, allegedly of Thor himself, showing a handsome man with the features described in the accounts. He also included testimonials from others who claimed to have met Thor or knew about his presence at the Pentagon. Over the years, Stranges gave numerous lectures and interviews about Thor, never wavering from his story, even in the face of skepticism and ridicule. He maintained until his death in 2008 that every word was true, that Valiant Thor was real, and that the government knew far more about extraterrestrial contact than it was willing to admit. So what are we to make of this story? Skeptics point out numerous problems with the Valiant Thor narrative. There's no official documentation of Thor's presence at the Pentagon, no records of meetings with Eisenhower or other officials, and no corroborating evidence beyond the testimonies of Stranges and a handful of others. The photographs could easily be of any handsome man from the 1950s, and the story contains elements that seem borrowed from science fiction and contactee literature of the era. The idea of Venusians living in a different dimension conveniently explains why our space probes found no evidence of life. but it also makes the claim unfalsifiable, impossible to prove or disprove. Moreover, the story fits a little too neatly into certain narrative patterns. The benevolent alien offering salvation if only humanity would change its ways is a common trope in contactee accounts. The rejection by the military-industrial complex plays into anti-establishment sentiments and conspiracy theories about secret government knowledge. And the spiritual elements, the emphasis on love, peace, and enlightenment, align perfectly with the New Age movement that was gaining momentum during the time Strangers was telling this story. Yet, for all the reasons to be skeptical, the story of Valiant Thor persists and continues to resonate with people. Perhaps it's because, true or not, it speaks to something deep in the human psyche, our hope that we're not alone, that there are beings out there who care about us and want to help us, and that there's a better way to live than the path of conflict and destruction we so often seem to follow. The story also taps into a widespread distrust of government and institutions, the belief that those in power are hiding important truths from the public for their own benefit. Some researchers have tried to find evidence to support the Thor story, looking for any documentation or testimony that might corroborate the key claims. There are intriguing hints and coincidences. President Eisenhower did have several unexplained absences during his presidency, times when his whereabouts were unclear or when official explanations seemed inadequate. Some UFO researchers have suggested these absences were related to meetings with extraterrestrials. Eisenhower's farewell address, in which he warned about the dangers of the military-industrial complex, has been cited as evidence that he was aware of forces within the government that were working against the public interest, possibly the same forces that rejected Thor's offer. There are also accounts from other individuals who claim to have encountered Thor or beings like him. Some contactees have described meetings with Venusians or other benevolent aliens who delivered similar messages about nuclear weapons and humanity's spiritual evolution. While these accounts don't prove Thor's existence, they do show that the themes and ideas in his story were part of a larger cultural conversation happening in the 1950s and beyond. The story of Valiant Thor also raises profound questions about how we would actually respond to contact with an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. If an alien did arrive offering miraculous technology in exchange for disarmament, would we accept? Could we accept? The geopolitical realities, the economic interests, the sheer inertia of our current systems, all of these would make such a radical change incredibly difficult, even if the offer was genuine and the benefits were real. In that sense, whether Thor was real or not, the story serves as a thought experiment, a mirror held up to our civilization, asking us to consider what we truly value and what we're willing to sacrifice for a better future. As the decades have passed, the story of Valiant Thor has evolved and expanded. Other authors and researchers have added to the narrative, claiming their own encounters or revealing additional details about Thor's mission and his people. Some say he has returned to Earth multiple times, that he's still working behind the scenes to guide humanity toward enlightenment. Others claim to channel his messages or to be in telepathic contact with him. The story has become part of the larger tapestry of UFO lore, connected to other tales of secret government programs, alien bases, and cosmic conspiracies. In the end, we're left with a story that's impossible to verify, but equally impossible to completely dismiss. Valiant Thor, whether he was a real extraterrestrial visitor, a misidentified human, a government disinformation project, or simply a creation of Frank Strange's imagination, has become a legend, a modern myth that speaks to our deepest hopes and fears about our place in the universe. The story reminds us that we live in a vast cosmos full of possibilities, that the universe may be far stranger and more wonderful than we can imagine, and that perhaps, just perhaps, we're being watched over by beings who care about our fate and are waiting for us to be ready to join them among the stars.